Let's work a tucked rib in a special way on the all-in-one loom. I've already cast on with a tripled strand using the long tail cast on. That's a separate video. Now for the all-in-one loom and the project that I have in mind for this, I'm recommending that we E-wrap our stitches. So here we are E-wrapping. When you get to within 2 pegs from the end, you have worked all but 2, or wrapped all but 2. Wrap all the way across the board, and then wrap these last 2. And we're going to knit all the normal stitches in the normal fashion. But we're just going to ignore that across the board wrap to the other peg. If you noticed a little glitch, it's because I stopped and fixed a peg that had accidentally gotten wrapped twice. I didn't see myself do it, but maybe you did. So we're knitting all of these over. This is just your normal E-wrap stockinette stitch. You could also do this with U-wrap. In the pattern that I'm using, that I'm having in mind for this, we're always going to slip the first stitch of each row. That simply means don't knit it. So I'm going to wrap stitch number 2, wrap the peg on the back, wrap stitches 3, 4, 5, and 6, and knit them over. The point of slipping the first stitch is that it makes a neater edge where you're not going to be seaming anything together. And this project is a scarf. You can use this edging on a lot of things. Scarves are an excellent use, as are blankets, but you would use it where you need a free edge, skipping the first peg. And a slipped initial stitch makes the edge tighter and tidier. And it's especially important where we're using the tucked rib that we are going to use. Now what, you may wonder, are all those loops on the back going to ever be, since I'm not doing anything with them and they're building up? And what they are going to be, what they are, is making space for our tucked rib without taking up room on the front board. There are other ways to get this space. You could also skip needles, and on some looms that may work better. You can actually go ahead and knit the stitch and ladder it down later and use the ladders that are created as a space for the tucked rib. All of that is just fine, but for this particular project on the all-in-one loom and on the Kiss loom, the technique of knitting across the board, or wrapping across the board — we never actually knit those till much later — is quite helpful. It's efficient. It means we can work a whole row without interruption, and it gives a very specific size of loop building up. These aren't in my way yet. As soon as enough build up that it's difficult to pull the knitting down, I'll just drop them off. So let's knit a couple more rows and say we get to that point. Now about slipping the first stitch. Some knitters get worried about that because they say to themselves, well, will the fabric ever grow on that side? And that's a legitimate concern, except for watch what happens. The first stitch is now on the right. So we're going to skip it and knit across. And true, the fabric will not grow on the right this row, but we will knit all the way to the left, and the leftmost stitch is the last stitch on this row. However, it is the first stitch on the next row. So it knitted very recently, and now it's going to be slipped or skipped, and we'll wrap across. Now the last stitch on the right was the first stitch last row, and it didn't knit, but now it knits. So the effect is that these stitches knit every other row, and that tightens up our edge. For many knitters, for me, the exact right amount. I certainly did not invent the technique. This is a very old hand knitting technique that has worked for eons, probably 1,000 years, for many knitters. If you don't like it, don't use it, but I do recommend it where using the tuck rib, because otherwise the tuck rib is not as tidy since it's near the edge. Alright, let's get rid of these. They're starting to impede my progress. Just be sure they drop down. Oops, don't you run off. Examine all my pegs to make sure they're not holding anything they shouldn't be, i.e. one of those loops we just dropped off. There's our ladder forming, and we will eventually use that ladder to our advantage. Right now we just want to pull it down. As you work on some looms and with some knitting styles, this stitch and this stitch may start to grow, borrowing length from these. That's okay. We can get it back later, so don't be upset if you see that happening. I'm going to do a few more rows so you'll get something good to watch off camera, and then I'm going to show you the tuck rib, working the actual tuck rib up that ladder, so I'll see you in a minute. I would like to show you how to cast off or bind off when using tucked rib. It is my preference to leave these last few on the peg while I bind off, though you don't have to. I just decided, having worked it both ways, that it was a little bit easier to have them held. Transfer the left stitch to the next stitch over. Now there are two on that peg. Wrap as though making a new stitch, and in fact you are. Lift both loops over that new stitch, move the new stitch to the next peg, and we do this all the way across. Very simple. Creates a chain looking edging. You have a lot of control over how tight it is. And one more. And on the last one, snip the yarn tail, and after I make the stitch and knit it over, I'll just pull that tail all the way through. Knit it over, pull it through. And now ditch all these, making sure they don't catch on anything. So here's what we have. Looks like a mess, but it will soon look better. Before we knit up our column, let's take a good look at it. We're looking at the purl side. These loops were all formed by hanging on the peg across the board. Here's the knit side. Here's the cast on where my thumb is. Here's the bind off. So we're going to work from the purl side, and we're basically going to create a column of purl stitches where there are no stitches. That got twisted. Start by inserting your tool right through the cast on. Any place it'll let you. Just look around for what looks neat and pull through the first rung of the ladder of empty pieces of yarn. That one's split. Let me fix that. Also, I want to show you something. My real preference is to work with a latch tool. That's what it looks like. And this piece opens and closes, making it easy to hold on to stitches. This is a machine knitting tool, and you can get them from people who supply them. You can also make them by consulting a book of mine. I actually have ways to make them in two of my books. One is Cheap Tricks for Machine Knitters, and one is Cool Tools for Machine Knitters. But if you don't have one and don't really want to fool with it, you can also use a crochet hook. This is a bamboo crochet hook because that's what I like, but they all work the same, as you know. After we go through the cast on to start our column, we go behind two and pull through the second, just as I just did. Behind two rungs, pull the second one through. It does matter that we go behind. Watch what would happen if we went in front. If I just skip that one, it leaves a strand on the front to pop out and make a mess. Not attractive. But we're going to trap that strand. I have to undo what I just did. By working behind it, it can't go anywhere. It's trapped behind the chain, between the chain and the next rung on the ladder. Some of these stitches, that one got a little distorted. All you have to do if you feel it's uneven is pull a little bit sideways so that you can get your hook in, and then when you hook and pull the stitch through, give it a little tug. Some of these stitches left and right of the column may have grown a little, and they may stay a little bit grown, and that's okay. It actually adds to the effect that we're after, but we don't want them to be disproportionate. There's a certain amount of art to this as well as science, and you will get the feel of it very easily. It depends to some degree on the yarn you're using, how much trouble this feature gives you, but you can see it's really not much. By the way, I'm working with Mary Maxim's Starlet yarn. See, that one I wanted to tighten up a little bit there, which I like very well. I'm new to using it, but I'm enjoying it. We're at the top, and there was really no stitch here, so we have nowhere to put this. Let's do this again. This is my last stitch in the column. I'm going to pull it through the bind off, push my tool through the bind off, pull this separate piece of yarn through both loops, then yarn over the hook and pull both ends through. There we go. Now it's disappeared. I mean, the top fastening has disappeared. We have a lovely column of tuck rib that will stop the edge from rolling. But we still have these two. And what else tuck rib is good for is giving you an easy place to weave in. Let's see how this works. Crochet hook in and out, in and out, in and out of the back of the tuck rib stitches. Grab both yarn tails, pull them gently through, straighten it out, and you really don't notice it much from the front. You can see it a little bit. I can see it going over and under, so if that bothers you, instead, let me pull it out. Separate them, and this is truly easier with a latch tool. I think everyone should invest in one. Go in and out of the neighboring stitches and only pull one strand of yarn on the right, if I could ever get a hold of it. There we go. Pull it through and do the same on the left, in and out of the backs of stitches. This is a real easy method of weaving in. Of course, we could also put our yarn tails on a yarn needle. But this is what I normally do. And then snip, snip, and they'll never be seen or heard from again. And that's even more invisible.